The sun was setting over the Kedron Valley when Marcus, a 25-year-old Roman centurion, stumbled through the ancient pathway that separated Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. His bronze armor clanked with each labored step, blood seeping through the gaps and staining the dust beneath his feet crimson. 3 days earlier, he had been ambushed by zealots on the Jerusalem road, not for any cruelty he had shown, but simply because he wore the uniform of Rome. The wound in his side festered like fire, and fever burned through his body with merciless intensity. His fellow soldiers had given up the search, assuming him dead among the rocks and thorns of the Judean wilderness. Now, alone and dying, Marcus collapsed near an ancient olive tree, its gnarled roots seeming to drink the tears that fell unbidden from his burning eyes. "Is this how it ends?" he whispered to the darkening sky, his voice barely audible above the evening breeze that carried the scent of olive blossoms and distant cooking fires from Jerusalem. At that very moment, Jesus and his disciples were making their way through the valley, returning from a day of intense teaching in the temple courts. The confrontations with the Pharisees had been particularly bitter, and the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily upon his heart like a stone. Yet as they walked along the familiar path, Jesus suddenly stopped, his piercing yet gentle eyes fixed on something the others couldn't yet perceive. "Master, what is it?" Peter asked, following Jesus' gaze toward the massive olive tree where shadows were beginning to gather. Without answering, Jesus began walking toward the fallen figure, with purposeful strides. As they drew closer, the disciples could make out the distinctive Roman armor glinting in the fading light, and several instinctively stepped back. Romans were their oppressors, the iron fist that crushed their people and bled them dry with taxes and cruelty. "Teacher," Matthew whispered urgently, his voice tight with concern, "it's a Roman soldier. We should keep walking before someone sees us here." But Jesus knelt beside Marcus in the dust, his eyes filled with a compassion that transcended nationality, politics, and the uniform that marked this young man as an enemy. The soldier's breathing was shallow and ragged, his face pale as parchment, his lips cracked and bleeding. Jesus gently placed his weathered hand on the young man's burning forehead, feeling the fever that was consuming him from within. Marcus's eyes fluttered open, expecting to see vultures circling overhead or perhaps the faces of his killers returning to finish their work. Instead, he found himself looking into the most compassionate eyes he had ever encountered, eyes that seemed to hold all the love and sorrow of the world. For a moment, he was certain he was hallucinating from the fever. Who are you?" Marcus managed to gasp, his throat raw and dry as desert sand. "I am Jesus of Nazareth," came the gentle reply, spoken with such tenderness that it seemed impossible this man could be the revolutionary his superiors had warned him about. "And you are hurt, my son." Even in his delirium, Marcus recognized the name that had been whispered in every corner of Palestine. This was the teacher who performed miracles, who made the blind see and the lame walk, the one Roman commanders discussed in worried tones during their evening councils. Fear should have gripped him, but instead, he felt an inexplicable peace wash over him like cool water on parched ground. You're the one they call the Messiah," Marcus whispered, his Roman training warring with the strange comfort he felt in this man's presence. Jesus smiled softly, an expression so full of love that it seemed to illuminate the gathering darkness. "I am the one who came to heal the brokenhearted and bind up their wounds, all wounds, my son." The disciples watched in stunned amazement as their master, who had every earthly reason to let this Roman soldier die in agony, instead showed him the same boundless love he had shown to every other suffering soul they had encountered on their journey together. "Master," Judas interjected, his voice sharp with political concern, "if someone sees you helping a Roman soldier, they'll say you're collaborating with the enemy. Think of what this could mean for our cause." Jesus looked up at his disciples, his expression both infinitely gentle and utterly firm. "The Father's love knows no boundaries, Judas. This man bleeds the same red blood as you. He feels pain, as you do. He fears death as any of us would. In his suffering, he is not Roman or Jew. He is simply a child of God in need of mercy." Turning back to Marcus, Jesus asked with quiet intensity, "Do you believe that God can heal you, my son?" Marcus struggled with the question that seemed to reach into the very depths of his soul. His Roman upbringing had taught him to worship a pantheon of distant, capricious gods who demanded sacrifice but offered little comfort. None had ever seemed as real or as near as this Jewish teacher kneeling beside him in the dust, willing to risk everything simply to show compassion to an enemy. I don't know what I believe anymore, Marcus admitted, tears mixing with the dirt and blood on his cheeks. But if you are who they say you are, if you really are the Son of God, then yes, Lord, I believe you can heal me. The words came from deeper than conscious thought, from a place in his heart he hadn't known existed until this moment. Jesus placed both hands on the soldier's wounded side, and immediately Marcus felt something he had never experienced in all his years of battle and bloodshed. Your faith, though small as a mustard seed, is enough, Jesus said softly. A warmth, unlike anything Marcus had ever known, began to spread from where Jesus touched him. It wasn't merely physical healing. Something far deeper was happening, something that reached into the very core of his being and began transforming him from the inside out. The disciples later swore they saw light emanating from Jesus' hands, though whether it was visible to the eye or simply felt in the spirit, none could say with certainty. Marcus felt his strength returning like the dawn breaking over mountains, his fever breaking and dissipating like mist before the morning sun. The excruciating pain that had been his constant companion for 3 agonizing days simply vanished. But more than his body was being healed. Years of hardness built up from following brutal orders without question, of viewing conquered peoples as less than human, of believing that might made right. All of it was melting away under the transforming power of unconditional divine love. The wound. Marcus gasped in wonder, looking down at his side where moments before there had been a gaping, festering injury that should have killed him. Now there was nothing but healthy, unmarked skin, as if he had never been wounded at all. Jesus helped him sit up with gentle hands, and Marcus stared in amazement at his body, completely whole, completely healed, stronger than he had felt in years. But it was his heart that had undergone the most dramatic transformation. Where once there had been hardness, now there was tenderness. Where once there had been prejudice, now there was love for all people. Where once there had been emptiness, now there was the overwhelming presence of the living God. How? Marcus whispered, though he already knew the answer in the deepest part of his renewed heart. Love, Jesus replied with simple profundity. Perfect love that casts out all fear, all hatred, all division between God's children. Marcus struggled to his feet, no longer the dying soldier who had collapsed in despair under the olive tree. He stood before the Son of God as a completely new man in every sense of the word. Without hesitation, he removed his bronze helmet and knelt in the dust before Jesus, his actions speaking louder than any words could express. Lord, he said, the word rising from the very depths of his transformed soul. I believe you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You have not only healed my body, you have given me new life. The disciples watched in stunned, reverent silence as this Roman centurion, their enemy by every earthly measure, made a declaration of faith that some of them had taken months or even years to reach. Here was living proof that God's grace could transform the hardest heart, that his love could bridge any divide. Jesus placed his hand on Marcus's bowed head in blessing, and power seemed to flow between them like electricity. Rise, my son. Your faith has not only made you well in body, but has made you whole in spirit. Go in peace, and let your life be a testimony to the power of God's transforming love. As Marcus stood, he faced a choice that would define not only the rest of his life, but his eternal destiny. He could return to his legion, say nothing of what had happened, and attempt to continue as before. Or he could let this miracle transform not just his body, but his entire existence, no matter what the cost. Teacher, Marcus said, his voice now steady and strong, I cannot go back to who I was. That man died in this valley tonight. How can I serve you? How can I live worthy of this gift you've given me? Jesus smiled with the same radiant joy he had shown to Matthew when he called him from the tax collector's booth, the same transforming love he had offered to Peter when he called him from his fishing nets. Go back to your people, Marcus. Tell them what the Lord has done for you. Be a light in the darkness of the legion. Show them that there is another way, the way of love, mercy, and peace. Your uniform may remain the same, but your heart has been forever changed. As they parted ways that evening in the Kedron Valley, the disciples were forever marked by what they had witnessed. They had seen their master heal many people, but never had they seen such a complete transformation, body, mind, and spirit, happen in a single moment. And they understood more deeply than ever that the kingdom of God truly knew no boundaries, that his love was big enough to embrace even their enemies. Marcus returned to his barracks that night a changed man. In the days that followed, his fellow soldiers noticed the transformation immediately. The harsh centurion who had ruled through fear and intimidation was gone, replaced by a leader who commanded through love and respect. He began protecting the Jewish people rather than oppressing them, using his position to show mercy wherever possible. And whenever anyone asked about the change in him, he would tell them about the evening in the Kedron Valley when he met the Son of God, and how love had conquered death itself in his heart. Years passed, and Marcus became known throughout the Roman Empire as the Centurion of Love. His transformation was so complete and his testimony so powerful that it sparked a revival among Roman soldiers stationed throughout Palestine. He would gather his men not for brutality training, but to tell them about the rabbi who had shown him that true strength came not from the sword, but from love. Many of his soldiers converted to follow Jesus, creating the first Christian fellowship within the Roman military. When word reached Rome of Marcus's unusual leadership style and the growing number of soldier converts under his command, he was summoned before Caesar himself. Standing in the marble halls of power, wearing his gleaming armor but carrying a heart transformed by divine love, Marcus fearlessly shared his testimony with the most powerful man in the world. Caesar, Marcus said with respectful boldness, I have served Rome faithfully for over a decade. I have conquered cities and crushed rebellions in your name. But I tell you truly, the greatest victory I have ever witnessed was not won with sword or spear, but with love. In a dusty valley outside Jerusalem, I met the Son of the living God, and he conquered death itself within my heart. The emperor listened in fascination as Marcus recounted every detail of that transformative evening. The fever that should have killed him, the wounds that had festered beyond healing, and the moment when divine compassion had made him completely whole. He spoke of how Jesus had seen past his Roman uniform to the broken man beneath, offering healing to an enemy without asking for anything in return. This Jesus, Caesar inquired, leaning forward on his golden throne, does he seek to overthrow Rome? Does he gather armies as other would-be messiahs have done? Marcus shook his head with conviction. His kingdom is not of this world, Caesar. He conquers not through violence, but through love. He transforms not by force, but by grace. I have seen him make the blind see, the lame walk, and the dead rise. But his greatest miracle is what he does to the human heart. He takes our hatred and replaces it with love, our fear with faith, our despair with hope. The story of Marcus's healing spread like wildfire throughout the empire. Roman wives whispered it in their gardens. Merchants carried it along trade routes, and soldiers shared it around campfires from Britain to Egypt. It became known as the miracle that proved God's love knew no boundaries, that the same Jesus who healed Jewish lepers and fed hungry crowds would risk everything to save one dying Roman soldier in a forgotten valley. But the most powerful part of the story wasn't just the physical healing. It was the complete transformation that followed. Marcus had become living proof that encountering Jesus changed everything. Former enemies became brothers, oppressors became protectors, and hearts of stone became hearts of flesh. The ripple effects of that one evening in the Kedron Valley continued to spread for generations. Decades later, when Marcus was an old man, with silver hair and gentle eyes that still sparkled with the joy of his salvation, he would return to that olive tree in the Kedron Valley. He would kneel in the same spot where he had nearly died, place his weathered hands on the ancient roots and offer prayers of thanksgiving for the moment when divine love had intersected with human desperation. "Lord Jesus," he would whisper, tears of gratitude flowing freely. "You saw past my uniform to my heart. You saw past my nationality to my need. You saw past my sins to my soul. That night, you didn't just heal my wounds. You gave me a reason to live, a purpose to serve, and a love that has never failed." Pilgrims would often find him there, this legendary centurion whose story had inspired countless conversions across the Roman world. They would ask him to retell the miracle, and he would oblige with the same passion and wonder as if it had happened yesterday rather than decades ago. "Never forget," Marcus would tell them, his voice still strong despite his advanced years, "that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace. I was an enemy soldier lying in my own blood, abandoned and dying. Yet Jesus knelt beside me in the dust and showed me love I had never known existed. If he could transform a heart as hardened as mine, he can transform anyone's. The miracle isn't just that he healed my body, though that was wonderful beyond words. The miracle is that he gave me a new heart, a new purpose, and a new eternal home." The olive tree under which Marcus had collapsed became known throughout the Christian world as the Tree of Transformation. Believers would make pilgrimages there, praying for their own miracles, their own encounters with divine love. Many testified that they too experienced profound spiritual healing in that sacred place, where heaven had touched earth through an act of pure compassion. As Marcus aged, his testimony only grew more powerful. He had lived long enough to see the church Jesus founded spread throughout the known world, carried by disciples whose hearts had been similarly transformed by divine love. He had witnessed persecution and triumph, sorrow and joy, but through it all his faith remained unshakable because it was built on the solid rock of personal experience with the living God. The miracle at the Valley of Tears became more than just a story. It became a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt forgotten, abandoned, or beyond redemption. It proved that God's love could reach into the darkest valley, the most hopeless situation, the hardest heart, and bring forth new life. Marcus's transformation became a template showing that no matter who we are or what we've done, we are never too far gone for God's grace to find us and make us whole. And so the story lived on, passed down through generations of believers who found in it the promise that they too could experience the miracle of divine love. Love that heals not just bodies, but hearts, minds, and souls. Love that transforms enemies into family. Love that turns valleys of tears into gardens of hope. The centurion's miracle had become everyone's promise, that God's grace is sufficient, his love is unconditional, and his power to transform lives is as real today as it was on that unforgettable evening when Jesus knelt beside a dying soldier and changed the course of history with a simple act of compassion.